Hello, it's Dawn Michelle from Boho Tarot, and today I thought we'd just take a look at some of the darker decks in my collection. So it's usually around this time of year that I start pulling out my darker decks, and these are the decks that are not necessarily dark in terms of their energy or, the way that they read, although I definitely have a selection of those here for you as well. But primarily the majority of my decks that I consider my darker decks are just decks that kind of have the feel of the season in terms of their imagery. So they have darker color palettes and they have that sort of imagery that we like to connect with during this time of year. So let's make some space and check out some decks. So to start things off, we're going to get the one out of print deck out of the way. I generally don't like to show out of print decks on my channel because I know that can be frustrating for people when it's really hard to get a hold of a deck. But this deck did come to me in a collection of decks that Barbara sent me recently, so I did want to give it a quick mention. And it is a really interesting deck. It was an indie produced deck that came out in 2014 by Eleanor Boyce. And it was a limited edition, so they only ran, I believe, 100 copies, so it is out of print. It did come with this nice little guidebook, which has these great images and these little descriptions below. And it's an interesting deck. Now, I haven't read with it at all, and you'll see that it's still in order, but I've definitely looked through it. It also has a little white book that comes with it. And this tarot deck is bizarre. So the imagery is really kind of creepy. It's kind of weird. As you can see, it's a black and white deck, and I tend to like the black and white decks during this time of year. But these creatures, they're kind of alien-like, which is interesting. And again, the imagery is just really kind of bizarre. And I do really kind of like it. Like I said, I haven't done any readings with it. I've just looked through it. But it's a really interesting deck. Here's the backs. So that is the Singing Serpent Tarot. And this is a deck that I think just really taps into that kind of creepy energy of the season. So I think it works really well during this time of year. So next up we have the Tarot of Unknown Shadows, and this is an indie deck, but it is still available on Etsy. So this deck is just... I can't think of a better word for it than creepy. It is just a creepy deck. All of the images are just kind of disturbing. That Magician card, I think, is the creepiest Magician card I've ever seen, and it really kind of throws me for a loop every time I see it. Like, it gives me the willies. I'm not even sure what I think about that. But if, you want to be creeped out by your tarot deck and you want to kind of tap into that creepy, spooky energy of this time of year, I think this is a fabulous deck for it. It does have really powerful imagery in it, so I do want to give it a fair chance, but there are a couple of cards in this deck that literally give me the willies. Like, they actually make my skin crawl. So I'm not sure how I'm going to be using that, but, if you're the kind of person that likes horror movies and that kind of thing, this deck to me is a horror movie in a deck. It gives me the heebie-jeebies. So that is the Tarot of Unknown Shadows. So up next we have the Tarot of Curiosities, and this is another indie deck, and it is available on the creator's website still. And this is a collage deck, comes with a little book that I believe that the creator mentioned was the images were cut paper collage. So that makes it a quite interesting deck in terms of how the images lay over the top of the cards. I really like the strength card in this deck. I think it's absolutely beautiful. One of my favorite cards in this deck for sure. There is a lot of confronting kind of creepy-ish imagery in this deck as well, as you can see. But again, I think it really taps into that energy of the season. I do quite like the minors in this deck. I like that there are keys. And let's see. The one thing that kind of throws me is the syringes for one of the suits. And then we have these vials or bottles. And then we have the locks. So what I really like, I'm not fond of this suit, but I am pretty fond of the other three suits with the vials, the locks, And if I can find them here, the keys. And I think these are all really cool. It's definitely kind of a creepy little deck, but it's not disturbing. Well, this suit's a little bit disturbing, but it's not disturbing to the level that I have found the Tarot of Unknown Shadows to be disturbing. For the most part, I actually really like the imagery. And it really has that kind of Samhain Halloween vibe to me, that energy. So I am looking forward to giving it a try this season. So that is the Tarot of Curiosities. So the next deck we have is the Animalist Oz Fortuna. And I probably just slaughtered that. It could be Oz Fortuna. Again, this is another deck that Barbara sent to me. It does have a little book, which for some reason doesn't fit in the box. Which seems weird for a guidebook. And it is this white text on black paper, and it's very hard to read. This deck is, again, another one I haven't worked with. I've just looked through it. Here's the backs, and I think I forgot to show you the backs of the last ones. So let's pop that in there. There is the back of the Tarot of Curiosities, because I totally forgot to show you that. It's got the lock on the back. It's really cool. And in case I forgot to show you, here's the back of the Tarot of Unknown Shadows. I'm real prepared today, as you can tell. So this deck is really interesting. It is another indie deck, and it is still available on Etsy. So it's a black and white deck, and it kind of has this macabre feel to it, and all of the images are represented by animals and bones. So you'll see these animal figures, but then you'll see the hints of the skeletal structure of the animals underneath, which is really interesting. Again, another deck I haven't read with. I've just looked through. The artwork is really quite striking. It's very bold. I do kind of like the fact that it's black and white. I've been really wanting to work with some black and white decks, so this one really kind of hits the mark for me for that. It is an animal deck, which is usually not my thing, but I do kind of quite enjoy that macabre nature to it. And it's just a really interesting deck. And again, like I said, the artwork is really striking, and it's this black and white. It's just fabulous. And there's the back of those ones. So that is the Animalist Oz Fortuna, or Oz Fortuna, something along those lines. So that was a quick look at the 4 decks that really tap into that dark energy of the season. Like, you can really feel it within all of these decks. So let's shift gears and take a look at some of the decks that take a little bit of a lighter approach to this seasonal energy. So one of my favorite decks that have kind of a darker theme to it in terms of the artwork, but isn't necessarily dark in terms of energy, is the Darkness of Light Tarot. And this is an absolutely gorgeous deck. I know I've shown it many times on my channel, so I won't go into too much detail, but it's really the color palette of this deck that kind of has that autumny Samhain feel to me. And I mean, truth be told, I love using this deck any time of the year, but during this time of the year, it just really seems to sort of vibrate with that energy for me. It doesn't necessarily have dark and creepy messages coming from it. It just more is in terms of the color palette and the imagery that really taps into that autumn energy for me. So that is the Darkness of Light Tarot. So next we have the Santa Muerte Tarot, which is a tarot deck that I really love this deck. It's a beautiful backs. It really is, even though it's kind of macabre a little bit, it really does take more of a lighthearted approach. The images, like the illustrations, the imagery is just really striking in this deck. I get great readings from this deck. I love the little guidebook that comes with it. It's just fabulous. But it's kind of a deck that, like, I take it seriously, but on the other hand, it's just so kind of light and fun. You know, it's like going trick-or-treating versus visiting a haunted house. Like the 4 decks I kind of showed earlier with that darker energy, those to me are like going into a scary haunted house. Whereas these decks are more like, you know, dressing up and going trick-or-treating. There's so many little gifts to be discovered within this deck, but there's nothing that unnerves you, nothing creepy, nothing scary within these images. And the messages are all really fabulous and really on point. And again, this is another deck that I use year round. I'm particularly fond of it during this time of year because it kind of has that energy, that, like I said, that kind of Halloween-y, going trick-or-treating energy. So that is the Santa Muerte Tarot. So next we have the Bohemian Gothic Tarot, and this is of course a Baba Studio deck, and I know you guys have seen this a million times. This to me, here's the backs, it's a gorgeously produced deck, but I've mentioned this in other videos, I really have a hard time connecting with this deck, or I have had in the past a really hard time connecting with this deck. So I'm hoping that maybe making use of it during this season when I'm a little bit more open to this kind of imagery might help me make that connection with it. Overall, it's a gorgeous deck, and I absolutely love this world card. This is the one card in the deck that I really, really love, but it's really the only card that I can say that about. I mean, this is a nice card. And I'm just hoping that maybe I just haven't really given it a fair shake yet. I haven't used it. I got it, I looked through it and went, I don't know about that. And then I put it away. So I put it away specifically to hold on to it until this time of year. It is a gorgeous deck, so I'm hoping that I can make that connection to it over this season. So that is the Bohemian Gothic Tarot. Okay, the next two decks are actually decks that I bought specifically for this season. So I do try to get one new deck for the Halloween season, just kind of for fun. And this year I got the Zombie Tarot, and I actually got another deck, which we'll take a look at here in a minute. Look, I can't even manage it. Okay, let's just set that aside. So this is, of course, the Zombie Tarot. And this is just, here's the back. This is just such a cool deck. I do have the Housewives Tarot by the same creator. And this one is kind of been on my wish list for a long time. And I finally just decided that, this season I was going to go ahead and get it. And it's very collagey. It's very cheeky. Again, it takes a lighter approach, kind of like, like I said, trick-or-treating versus going to a haunted house. But I mean, the imagery is just fantastic, and this is a deck that I'm really looking forward to. It's not a deck that I think I would use any other time of year, but this time of year, yeah, I kind of feel like I need to tap into some of this zombie energy because that's just good fun. So that is the Zombie Tarot, which is a deck I bought specifically for this season this year. And finally, the last deck is the Halloween Oracle. This, again, is another deck that's been on my wish list for a really long time, and I just decided to go ahead and get it. I got it along with the Zombie Tarot. Here's the funny little backs. I was getting ready to say beautiful backs because that's usually what I say, but not so much on this deck. I really don't love the backs, but the fronts are gorgeous and more than make up for it. Again, this is a deck, like I said, it's been on my wish list forever, and decided to go ahead and get this one along with the Zombie Tarot to use this year. It's a deck that I could see myself using year-round, but I just thought right now during this time of year, this was a great time to get it and work with it and connect with it. I am going to be doing a mod on this deck. I'm going to be trimming it, so keep an eye out for that coming soon. But that is the beautiful Halloween Oracle. So that's a look at the 5 decks in my collection that take a little bit of a lighter approach to that dark seasonal energy. All good fun. These are more along the lines of decks that I kind of prefer to work with this time of year, just because sometimes that more creepy, confronting imagery, it's a lot to absorb. So these are the decks that I tend to gravitate towards throughout this season, because these are the decks that kind of tap into that energy for me. They're not quite so heavy and dark, but they definitely have that kind of darker Halloween, Samhain, autumn vibe to them, which I really do enjoy. And this one, I'm hoping, fingers crossed, we're going to make a connection this season. I think it's going to happen. So that was a look at the dark decks that I will be dipping in and out of throughout this Halloween, Samhain, autumn season. I would love to hear about the decks you'll be working with this time of year. Be sure to let me know in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing you again soon for more creative tarot for an inspired life.